Good afternoon. It is 1:30 p.m. exactly on March 11th, 2021, Dallas, Texas. We are going to resume where we stopped yesterday in Other People's Money and How the Bankers Use It by Louis de Brandeis. We're starting halfway down page 114. Where the banker serves not. It needs no banker experts in value to tell us that bonds of Massachusetts or New York, of Boston, Philadelphia, or Baltimore, and of scores of lesser American cities are safe investments. The basic financial facts in regard to such bonds are a part of the common knowledge of many American investors, and certainly of most possible investors who reside in the particular state or city whose bonds are in question. Where the financial facts are not generally known, they are so simple that they can be easily summarized and understood by any prospective investor without interpretation by an expert. Bankers often employ, before purchasing securities, their own accountants to verify the statements supplied by the makers of the security and use these accountants' certificates as an aid in selling. States and municipalities, the makers of the securities, might for the same purpose employ independent public accountants of high reputation who would give their certificates for use in marketing the securities. Investors could also be assured without banker aid that the basic legal conditions are sound. Bankers, before purchasing an issue of securities, customarily obtain from their own counsel an opinion as to its legality, which investors are invited to examine. It would answer the same purpose if states and municipalities should supplement the opinion of their legal representatives by that of independent counsel of recognized professional standing who would certify to the legality of the issue. Neither should an investment banker be needed to find investors willing to take up in small lots a new issue of bonds of New York or Massachusetts, of Boston, Philadelphia, or Baltimore, or 100 other American cities. A state or municipality seeking to market direct to investor its own bonds would naturally experience at the outset some difficulty in marketing a large issue. And in a newer community where there is little accumulation of unemployed capital, it might be impossible to find buyers for any large issue. Investors are apt to be conservative, and they have been trained to regard the intervention of the banker as necessary. The bankers would naturally discourage any attempt of states and cities to dispense with their services. Entrance upon a market hitherto monopolized by them would usually have to be struggled for. But banker-fed investors, as well as others, could, in time, be brought to realize the advantage of avoiding the middleman and dealing directly with responsible borrowers. Governments, like private concerns, would have to do educational work, but this publicity would be much less expensive and much more productive than that undertaken by the bankers. Many investors are already impatient of banker exactions and eager to deal directly with governmental agencies in whom they have more confidence. And a great demand could at once be developed among smaller investors whom the bankers have been unable to interest and who now never buy state or municipal bonds. The opening of this new field would furnish a market in some respects more desirable and certainly wider than that now reached by the bankers. Neither do states or cities ordinarily need the services of the investment banker to carry their bonds pending distribution to the investor. Where there is immediate need for large funds, states and cities, at least the older communities, should be able to raise the money temporarily quite as well as the bankers do now, while awaiting distribution of their bonds to the investor. Bankers carry the bonds with other people's money, not with their own. Why should not cities get the temporary use of other people's money as well? Bankers have the preferential use of the deposits in the banks, often because they control the banks. Free these institutions from banker control, and no applicant to borrow the people's money will be received with greater favor than our large cities. Boston, with its $1,500,000,000 of assessed valuations and 78,033,128 net debt, is certainly as good a risk as even Lee, Higginson and Company or Kitty, Peabody and Company. But ordinarily cities do not or should not require large sums of money at any one time. Such need of large sums does not arise except from time to time where maturing loans are to be met, or when some existing public utility plant is to be taken over from private owners. Large issues of bonds for any other purpose are usually made in anticipation of future needs rather than to meet present necessities. Modern efficient public financiering, through substituting serial bonds for the long-term issues, which in Massachusetts have been made obligatory, will, in time, remove the need of large sums at one time for paying maturing debts, since each year's maturities will be paid from the year's taxes. Purchases of existing public utility plants are of rare occurrence and are apt to be preceded by long periods of negotiation. When they occur, they can, if foresight be exercised, usually be financed without full cash payment at one time. Today, when a large issue of bonds is made, the banker, while ostensibly paying his own money to the city, actually pays to the city other people's money which he has borrowed from the banks. Then the banks get back, through the city's deposits, a large part of the money so received. And when the money is returned to the banker has the opportunity of borrowing it again for other operations. The process results in double loss to the city. The city loses by not getting from the banks as much for its bonds as investors would pay. And then it loses interest on the money raised before it is needed. For the bankers receive from the city bonds bearing rarely less than 4% interest, while the proceeds are deposited in the banks, which rarely allow more than 2% interest on the daily balances. This concludes at the top of page 119, about 4 lines down. I'm going to stop this and then I'm going to make another video.